Welcome to this webinar. This particular topic, I think, it's an extremely important topic. It's not just about interviewing at large and the largest law firms, but it's about how to interview at all law firms. And for 26 and a half years right now, I've been doing interview prep calls with attorneys almost every day. And then also watching what happens to people after interviews, whether it's at large firms or smaller firms. And typically the batting averages, and I don't know what yours is, but typically without any form of preparation, people that go into interviews, whether it's in the largest firms or in smaller firms, it's about 1 out of 8 that ends up getting close to getting an offer or gets an offer. So your odds are pretty low. They're about 12.5% for most interviews. It can obviously depend on the law supply and demand. So sometimes certain practice areas are in such demand that you can go into interviews and blow it, and they just don't have enough people to do the work, and you can get jobs if you're a bad interviewer. But in general, the better you interview, the more likely you're to get jobs. So what I'm going to go through today is actually an extended version of the interview prep I typically do. So I'm going to go into a lot more detail to really help you with your interviews and hopefully change how well you do. I can tell you that I would take notes during this and try to pay attention, because when I do interview prep for candidates, instead of their batting average being 1 out of 8, I typically will get 70 to 80% people will get interviews and go and get jobs from those interviews, meaning even if they're competing against 4 or 5 people, they do much better. One thing to think about, and I'll just add this point right at the beginning, is that when you go out on an interview and when a law firm's interviewing you, most of the time, not all the time, but the majority of time, when they see your resume, they really want to hire you. And then because they need someone to do work and they're losing money usually without having you there. But what happens is people go into interviews and they say all these things and they do all these things. It gets them disqualified. So it would be like going out on a date and telling someone something that they may not like. I want to be married to more than one person at the same time. That's my goal. Just people say stupid things that ends up destroying their chances of advancing. So I'm going to go over a lot of that today. This is a live webinar, so I'll take questions at the end. I hope that you will notice while I'm talking a lot of the reasons that you may have not done as well in the past in interviews. I was talking to one candidate this morning, and it was interesting. She'd been out of law school for 3 years, and she really wanted to work in a large law firm. And she had one interview with a large law firm and blew it. And so that might have been her only chance since she had been in law school to get a job with a major firm. So I'll go over those things with you today. I'll tell you how to turn interviews into offers. One final thing that I would just offer with interviews is that if you go and do an interview, you should never do things to disqualify yourself from getting hired. Your whole goal of an interview really is to get to the next stage. So the first stage is getting a callback usually. Then the next stage is getting an offer. And once you get an offer, you have a lot of options. You're able to, checking something here. Once you get an offer, offers are often negotiable. And getting an offer is a very good thing for people. So if you're able to get an offer from your interviews, then you can negotiate them. You can use them as leverage. You can do all sorts of things, but your goal is always to get an offer and not say things that are going to disqualify you. So I'll just tell you an example to get started. It's very common for very highly qualified people from the best law schools and the best firms to go out on interviews and not get jobs. And there are people that literally may go out on 10 or 15 interviews and not get a single job. And then people from top firms, people with the best qualifications, this can happen all the time. Interviews are also different depending on your seniority level. More senior people are looked at in a different way than less senior people and junior people. And so people will evaluate you based on different things that you may not even be aware of when you're interviewing. Law firms will ask different questions for people depending on their seniority level. Some of those questions come up during your screening. They can come up during callbacks, but you need to understand what those questions are. And you can't just prepare for one type of question or you need to prepare and understand what's going to happen at each stage of the process. So another thing that's very common for associates in big firms, for associates in smaller firms, is the law firms they will go into work in law firms, and this is something I literally, if I talk to 5 attorneys in a day looking for a job, 3 or 4 of them will tell me something related to they thought they would get a certain type of work, they're not getting a certain type of work. They go to a firm where it looks like they're going to get a certain type of work. They seem like they like the people when they interview and get a job there. For example, if they were a summer associate, many times when you're a summer associate, what happens in large law firms is the law firms are basically trying to be nice to you. They're giving you some work to do, but they give you reviews. They're often very good because they want you to come back and feel good about them. And then often when you start getting into a firm, when you're a junior associate at a lot of firms, not all firms, but reviews can seem, they get a little bit more cold and calculating. And you are someone that when you're a young attorney is often reviewed not as a little bit harshly because they want you to improve and you often don't know what you're doing, but it's just a different type of dynamic often. And so people may not like that. So they may be, sometimes people get very insecure, leave positions because of that, or they feel like they're in a hostile environment that's not that good. And many attorneys that I see will come out of environments where they might have been at not a top law school and were able to get a job in a top firm. Maybe they came from a working class family where they're making multiple times often what their parents made when their parents, when they were working or when they're working, they maybe from a lot of people will come out of smaller markets, like this is Rapid City, but smaller markets and people that they knew when they grew up with, they were more successful than them. They're making, you go to a large law firm, you're making a huge amount of money. And depending on the environment you're coming out of, it's very impressive. And many people that become lawyers are in top firms have had a history of doing very well. They did well when they were younger, in high school, middle school. They did well in college. People talk about them years later. There's some very high achieving people when they're younger. And but then often those high achieving people, they're hit with the reality this isn't easy. Sometimes it happens when they're in law school and they don't do well, but other times it happens when they get into law firms and they've been on this upward mobility like track for a long time and suddenly they're not. They feel like they're in a position where people aren't being nice to them, where they don't feel encouraged, where things are not as good as they could be. And you go into firms and you often know that the work's going to be very difficult, but at the same time, you may not like it. So you may be doing work in an office and not having a lot of contact with clients, not a lot of contact, not people aren't necessarily being nice to you. Your peers you're working with are often very competitive. And there's just lots of stress and the money comes and that may not seem like something that's even matters as much. You look at your peers from law school, they look like they're doing better. So people are always comparing themselves to others and make people often feel like, hey, they're not getting the assignments and the tasks and things that they're getting are not enjoyable. They don't enjoy the work they're doing. They don't feel challenged. And very common. When I say don't feel challenged, and that the work is it's not something that's fun. It's not something they're enjoying. You're in this office or you're working at home, but you don't get a lot of satisfaction from the work you're doing. And that's very common. It's people often just don't, they start practicing law. They don't like it. They don't like it when they start. And you look around that other attorneys in your firm aren't necessarily happy. People are leaving and can become a very not that happy of an existence. And this happens at large firms. It happens at smaller firms. And that when you're a young attorney, you're actually there to learn. It takes about 5 years to learn any practice area, but at the same time, you may not be enjoying yourself. They decide to look at other firms. They do it because they're unhappy at their current firm. They do it because they're not getting enough responsibility. They do it because they see that there's no way to advance. They do it because they don't feel welcome at the firm. They will do it for all sorts of reasons, but people look for new jobs. And the reasons you look for new jobs, I'll talk about the reasons that it can be a good idea to look for new jobs and what you should say and why law firms will ask what they'll ask and what they'll want to know when you're looking for new jobs. But the reason that works the best every time is something in your firm is holding you back from being the best attorney you could be. So the firm may not have enough sophisticated work. You might be in an environment where you can't bring in clients. You're trying to get better, and the firm has a larger practice in terms of what you're doing. The firm is more closely aligned to, it has to look like you have to make every move, if you can, look like advancement. And advancement can be going to a smaller firm for reasons like getting clients or doing trials or working on transactions. But every move that you make, if you're making as an attorney, has to look like something to do with upward mobility. And I'll just tell you that I hope you write this down because it's extremely important. If I place, say, 100 attorneys in a year, and I'm just saying that as that's me personally. If I place 100 attorneys in a year, I would say that of the people getting jobs, 75 of them looked for positions and sold themselves effectively as people that were trying to somehow move up for whatever reason. And moving up means becoming a better attorney, going into a firm that is set up so it's a perfect match for you to advance. And people that do that get jobs. People that just look like they're commodities and going into firms also get jobs. But the way to dramatically increase anything that you do, any job search that you do, is going to be to look like you're trying to advance somehow. And extremely important. Are you positioning yourself as someone trying to advance at a firm, and does that firm represent that to you? And can you make that case? So every interview, the most important question you can answer for yourself and when you go in there is, how does this firm match what I'm seeking to do to improve? And by the way, when I talk about improvement and moving up, you need to have goals for your career. You need to know where you're going. You need to be thinking about, what is it I want? How do I want to advance? What environment does this for me? And most people don't have goals. Most people don't know what they want. And because they don't know what they want, they're not thinking, who do I want to be in my legal career a year from now? Who do I want to be in my legal career 5 years from now? Who do I want to be 10 years from now? Because they don't think that way. Other people set their goals for them. They go to law firms. I see people all the time that go to law firms and they could be working there for 15, 20 years with no goals. And so they never get business and they're just taking work from others. Or people have no goals and they go in house and then they don't know like that and no goals. So that's really anybody that gets into a really good law firm. They typically get into a really good law firm because they work really hard. Their goal is to go to a really good law school. Then they worked really hard in whatever law school they went to and did really well. And then their goal was to get into a really good firm and they did that. And then suddenly they get into big firms and their goals are just missing. They have no goals. And it's very common. And as a matter of fact, I would say probably 60% or more of attorneys who go to work in large firms don't have any goals. And I would say in smaller firms, it's probably even a little bit higher. So if you have goals and a law firm represents something that's going to help you advance, then that's extremely important. And law firms love that. People want to hire people that want to advance, and it makes them feel good about their firms and that environment, that person makes it look like they can advance. So here's what lawyers do. Big firm lawyers, probably it's at least 80% of big firm lawyers will use recruiters when they're moving firms. And it's just how it works with big firm lawyers. They want to have someone advising them on the search. They want to have someone in the corner. And if you're at a small firm, you can use a recruiter too, or a middle market firm. Most attorneys don't in the middle market firms and smaller firms, but you certainly can. I represent lots of people from smaller firms. As long as they're trained in some certain practice area, they can. But people will send their resume, and the recruiters will say, hey, I'll send you to some firms. The search firm, hypothetically, might arrange 7 interviews. It might be 1 interview, it might be 2, but the search firm will arrange interviews. Then the attorney goes out on interviews. The firms just all will often feel the same. There's nothing distinguishing these different large firms. There's nothing that really makes you feel like there's something compelling about this new firm. People will receive callbacks. The callback percentages, by the way, when I say that about 1 out of 8 people get jobs when they have an interview, the callback percentages are actually fairly high. So I would say that when people go out on a screening interview, 70 to 80% of people will get a call back. So If you're not getting callbacks, then that's something to think about. But callbacks are basically, it's a look-see. The firm, they want to see what you look like, how you talk, how you connect with people. Most people, especially from large firms, are able to do that very well. So you should be getting a lot of callbacks compared to final jobs. But if you're not getting callbacks, this will help you as well. But this particular attorney I'm talking about, let's say that they got 7 interviews and they received a certain number of callbacks. They would probably receive about 5, not 3. But then they go out and they don't get a single job offer. And that can be crushing. If you're going out on interviews and no one is hiring you, then something's wrong. And usually what's wrong is the person has no goals. They're not enthusiastic about practicing law. They're not connecting with the interviewers and excited about things. They're often defeated before they ever go in, and their self-confidence is low, or they say bad things and they make interviews all about them, not the people they're talking to. And I could talk forever about what the psychology of interviews, but again, I'm going to tell you one thing right now, that if you adopt this psychology, you're going to go just from I'm going to tell you this very second. If you go from one thing to what I'm going to talk about and tell you about right now, and I hope you write this down, you will dramatically, when I say this will increase the odds of you getting callbacks and the odds of you getting jobs by probably 3 times, maybe 5 times, and because it works. So people will often ask questions. People will be asked for the law firm, someone in the interview will ask some questions. Do you have any questions? And when someone asks you if you have any questions, most people will ask questions, say things like, oh, how are matters staffed? When will I get this type of experience? How would you describe the culture? Just whatever. Sometimes they'll ask about benefits. They'll ask about remote work. They'll ask some of the stupidest questions. And those are stupid questions that don't move the ball for them at all. What you need to do when a law firm is asking questions, and the way you can even do this when they're not, you need to ask the interviewer, what is it that you're really looking for and how can I help you? What makes people successful here? So if I was hired, what would I need to do within the first 30 or 60 days to really be like one of your best hires in a long time? How could I make your job easier? What is it that you need? And you turn things from what a firm can do for you to what you can do for the firm. And any candidate that I have to do this that's done it really well always just knocks it out of the park. So because you put things in the term of what does the firm need? What do they need from me? Not what do I need from them? So that entire switch in your psychology, if you can do that, you're going to dramatically increase how you do, because ultimately people that are hiring you need something. They need help. They need dedicated workers to do the work. And that's what they need. And so if you can do that, then you're going to be in really good shape. Then people don't do that. And so thinking in terms of what you can do for someone else and not what they can do for you is the number one thing that I think an interviewer that interviewing that really makes a difference, because very few people do it. Most people don't think in terms of what they can do for the firm and what they can do with the people hiring them. I want to make one other quick point that also will change that dynamic for you fairly dramatically. And this is another thing that most attorneys don't think of, especially young attorneys, but it doesn't matter what level you are. So anybody, and again, this is another thing you probably should write down because it's extremely important. Anyone that's giving you work and that's hiring you is a client. So a client means someone under the care and protection of another. So if a partner in a law firm is going out and trying to get a client, that partner is going to be trying to bond with the people, connect with them. They're going to be asking them what they need. They're going to be asking them how they can help. They're going to be telling them they're enthusiastic about doing this. They're going to do the best job they possibly can. They're going to be very attentive. They're going to sit up. They're going to dress well. They're going to do whatever they can to bring in that client. So that's what partners do when they're trying to bring in clients. And the thing most associates and things don't understand, especially people that come out of great law schools and go into big firms, the biggest psychology switch you can make is to think that anybody that's giving you work, like if you're an associate, your partner that gets work from other partners, that person is your client. So a client is treated with profound respect. A client you're very attentive to. A client may call you at 2 a.m. and need something. And that's what they are. People that are giving you work are your clients. So if you start thinking these partners are my clients, then you're going to totally switch your psychology. And that psychology makes a huge difference because hardly anybody does that. And the idea also is you are trained, if you're a good attorney, especially a young attorney, you need to be thinking in terms of the people that are giving you work are your clients, and you're getting trained in how to relate to clients and how to be responsive and how to give them the best work possible and how to do more than anybody else would. Because what happens is when law firms and partners are competing for work, there's a lot of other people that can do the work that they have. There's hundreds of law firms that can do the same work, but the client is going to choose the people that they believe is going to do the best work. And so it's the same thing with partners. Partners will give work to the best people. Law firms will advance the best people that are doing the best work compared to others. So thinking about people that are giving you work as clients is just a massive psychology switch that no one does. It's just almost no one does. They think, oh, it's an employer-employee relationship. No, it's the exact opposite. It's training in how to relate to others, training in how to treat people like clients, training in how to make satisfied customers, all that sort of thing. And that's what you need. So people go out on these interviews, they don't do these things. They feel depressed, worthless. They feel like they're in this kind of slavery type position that they're not excited about. Some will not exercise, they will be unhealthy, they will use substances maybe, they just will be depressed, they'll get antidepressants, they'll have stress, they'll get stress pills, all this sorts of stuff happens. And it happens because you don't have goals and you don't have someplace you're going, and you're not thinking that I'm getting all this great training I can use for my whole career. People will go into work and hate it. People will be worried that other people will think how they feel. They just don't like it. And it's very common and it's not easy. Soldiers that are in basic training are marching around at all hours and doing sit-ups and push-ups. They may not like that either, but they can't always show that they don't. So people become worried about not advancing, getting fired. A lot of times people will think about leaving the practice of law entirely. It's very common for attorneys to think that way. People will often get to the point where they don't like clients, or they don't like the firms, where they think that maybe they should just not practice law anymore. They think that maybe they belong in a different practice setting, like in-house or in government, but then they worry about student loans and all this sort of thing, supporting families. And so when a lot of these people are applying for jobs, they don't understand why people aren't hiring them. They think that just because they're at a good firm and they have good credentials, that the market should respond to them differently. Now, about how markets respond to people. So it's always important to remember, even if you're not getting interviews, many times you should be fixing your resume. And this is not a resume repair workshop, but a good resume, this is the only thing you need to remember, typically talks in terms of one practice area and makes people think this person is an attorney in one practice area and de-emphasizes anything that doesn't have to do with that. 80% of resumes are talking about all these different practice areas, and because of that, people don't get interviews. But let's just talk frankly about market response. So markets respond to people depending on what the laws of supply and demand are. So there may be, if you're in a large market, for example, Washington, D.C., that's a big market with a lot of attorneys, and the response that people get from firms in that market may not always be that good if you're trying to do that. Same thing in markets like New York. So the more difficult, larger the market, the different type of response you may get. Now, larger markets have more opportunities, so that's good. Smaller markets have fewer opportunities. So depending on the market you're in, it doesn't always, what's happening in these markets doesn't maybe about the law of supply and demand. Even when you go out on interviews, there may be a lot of people you're competing with where if there were not enough people in your practice area, it's the same thing. Markets respond depending on what the market's doing. So for example, if there's a lot of IPOs, then capital markets and securities attorneys are in demand. If there's not, they're not. So markets respond differently. But often when people are dealing with recruiters, the recruiters may have never practiced law. They may not be lawyers. They may not be able to advise you in a way that could. So a lot of times when attorneys are failing on interviews, that people aren't giving them the sort of advice that will help them. And people feel stuck. And so they would stay at certain firms in unhappy situations when they probably could find an environment that does work for them. Now, let me just make another point for you that hopefully will make you feel a little bit better about your situation if you're unhappy. In the BCG database, we have, and we research these firms, but we have over 130,000 law firms in there in the United States. And a law firm is a firm that has more than a few attorneys in it. And so there are an inordinate amount of places that you can work. There are places where you can wade into the bar and work in other states and cities. And there are lots of cities probably in the state you're in. And ultimately, you can be happy practicing law if you're working with people that you like and getting work that you like. And the people you work with, whether or not you feel an affinity with them, the environment is a big deal. Do you feel an affinity with the people you're working with? And you can find people that are good, that are going to be the kind of people that you want to work with. You can, but many people don't. But then you get all these attorneys who think of maybe they should join the Peace Corps, teach high school English. I've seen people do that. They just start to think about other careers, other things that they can do, and often because they're not getting interviews. And that's very sad because I see people doing these things all the time when they don't have to, and because often they're just in the wrong environment or they're not interviewing well, and they think that they're defeated. And sometimes people will think about opening solo practices, which isn't actually that bad. Lots of people go, and if you open a solo practice in the right practice area, you can often be very happy. And I think that I would say that more than 35% or 50% of people that do that actually end up doing well, which is a very good percentage for a business. For a business to succeed, that much is good. A lot of times people will go back for MBAs. I see that a lot. And people will just spend a lot of time, and you may be doing the same thing, thinking about what else they should be doing, not satisfied where they're at, just wondering what's next, looking on the internet for other options. And so I see this stuff all the time. And I believe that no one needs to be in a desperate situation, and they need to approach things in a different way. And one other thing I just want to bring to your attention is there are attorneys that will literally almost always get every job that they interview for. And literally every job they go in and they so much impress the people that they're interviewing with that they just, everybody gives them jobs. And they understand something that most attorneys, and you may not have not yet learned, have already given you some really good pieces of advice. But I want to tell you about one other thing that was interesting to me. This is probably 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I had a candidate that was at Skadden Arps in New York and had been there for 15 years and was making a lot of money. She wasn't a partner, but she was making like $700,000 a year, something just ridiculous. And which would probably be a lot more now. And her husband was moving to the city, Martinsburg, West Virginia, or something, to be the CEO of a hospital. So that was his dream job. And so she was going to move with him. And so she went out, and I got her maybe 6 or 7 interviews with all these small law firms that were there. And these people didn't have anywhere near her qualifications. The work wasn't anywhere nearly as sophisticated as she was used to doing. This work was not at her level. These attorneys were not at her level. And the amount of money they could afford to pay her was not at her level. But she went in to every single one of these firms, and she knew this going in, and she just blew everyone away. Some of them made, I think 1 or 2 made offers right in the interview, and she got every job that she applied to, not because she necessarily wanted to work there, but because she understood that when you're going out and selling yourself and trying to, that the law firm is you're trying to get a client. And she knew how to do that. She watched attorneys at Skadden do that and been on the pitches. And she did that. And there's lots of people that do that. And obviously, job paying $85,000 a year, which was obviously not what she wanted, but she negotiated herself upward from there. And actually, I think she got into a partner role and started getting a lot of business there and doing well. But people can sell themselves. And so you need to learn how to sell yourself, and you need to understand a lot of stuff with interviews and what's going on. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more and what you can do to improve your chances. I do want to bring up one point that I brought up a few minutes ago, but the chemistry between people is important. So you may go into interviews with people that are just completely different than you. You may have been a college athlete who's very outgoing and has a certain type of personality. And then you go into interview with a firm where the people are just completely different. And you're not comfortable with them. Or you may be the opposite and go into a firm where there's a bunch of college athlete types and not be comfortable. So there's chemistry, there's the type of personalities that they are, the people that are there. Each law firm, many law firms have a certain type of people that they hire to not get jobs, not because there's anything inherently wrong with you, but because you're not connecting with them. But ultimately, I'm going to tell you a little bit more today about some of these pointers that are important. So the first thing, and this should be quite obvious, is to be prepared for interviews. And so you need to go into an interview understanding what the firm is about. When I prepare people, I will often have salary and bonus information, but that's not always that important. You shouldn't really focus on that before an interview because most of the time it's negotiable. And if you have certain salary requirements, you can bring that up after the offer often, and that's the best place to do it. When I prepare candidates for interviews, I will usually be able to send them information about the people they're talking to. You should always Google the firm, find out if there's any news about them and things that are going on. You should be very careful. You should understand other people's backgrounds you're reviewing and talking to, and that you should look at the type of clients they have on the website. You should try to look at the different attorneys and see what they're like, whether it's the schools or the type of things that they do, how they look. Do they look happy? Do they look serious? And just get a real good sense of the interview and the people that you're going to be talking to. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit right now about something that may sound a little strange to you, but it's actually extremely important. So if you find out the people that you're speaking with, you should, what I would do and what I tell my candidates to do that's very effective, you go and you print up their bio pages and their pictures of them. And most people, there's a rule that 1/3 of the people that we meet, the other third, we won't care. And the other third, for whatever reason, we will more dislike them. And that's just the general rule. It's been in psychology literature and stuff for a long time. I don't know if it's true, but I think it kind of is true. And so what that means is you have to take the people you're speaking with and you have to look at them and you have to think, why do I like this person? Or what about this person is something that I could like? And so do they remind me of a relative that I like? Do they remind me of a teacher? Do they remind me of someone I used to work for? And you write down and think about the reasons that you may like that person. And it's important. So my father was in the CIA when he was younger. And one of the first things that happened with him is he was in Switzerland or something, and his job was to make friends with someone or try to with a couple people. And so he was working on that. And he went and met with the person that he was working with and reporting to. And it's funny, he would go into a doctor's office and then they would send him into an examination room and then his handler would show up. So it didn't look like he was doing something like a spy or anything. Someone was following. But he got into this discussion with his handler and he was saying he didn't like this person and this is what was wrong with him and everything. And the handler, this was one of his first assignments, said, when you're talking to someone, if you want to be good at this, you have to not think those thoughts, because if you think that you don't like someone, you don't like them, then they will pick that up very easily. It'll be by your mannerisms or you look at them. So you have to think about reasons that you do like them. And if you think about that, then the person will feel more comfortable with you and you'll do better. So that's a very important way to think about your interviewers. So you think about reasons you like the firm. You think about reasons why you like the people there. And instead of thinking anything negative. And this is the big mistake that a lot of candidates make, is they go out in interviews and they have all these reasons that they might not like the person, not want to work there, or why they're uncomfortable with this. And because of that, they don't get jobs. And so extremely important. You need to look at your interviewers in a way that you like them. And so people also don't answer interview questions very well. So I'm going to talk to you about the most important interview questions. The biggest thing that law firms are asking and interviewers are thinking when they're hiring someone. They want to like you and other things, of course, but what they're really interested in most of the time is why you're looking for a job. And so why you're looking for a job is important because it could be because you're not doing well at your firm. It could be just because you want a new job. It could be because you're trying to increase your salary. It could be for all sorts of reasons, but this is the most important question. And I told you at the beginning of this webinar that law firms ask that question because they want to hire people that are trying to move up, that are trying to improve themselves, that are trying to get better. And if you're trying to get better, that's very attractive to someone. And that's really the most important. You're trying to improve. You're trying to get access to better work, more work, better clients, all that sort of that. You're trying to get more experience doing something. You want to land in a place where all these different things are important. Sometimes just I want to work in this city because I'm from there and I want to come home. Whatever the reason, it's very important. And so you need to be able to explain why the firm represents the most logical next step for you to become a better attorney, meaning you're moving up somehow or not down. Now, you could be interviewing at a firm in a different, it's not as good as yours and say that you like this firm because of this reason. You could be doing 2 practice areas at your current firm and you want to specialize in just 1 practice area. There's so many reasons you can give, but the law firm, whatever you're doing and interviewing with the law firm's interviewing you, the most important thing you can do is make that firm think that they're the absolute best choice for you, that you're moving up somehow. People like that. If you're moving down or sideways, then that's not as strong. Now, some firms are actually desperate for people and hire people regardless of these motivations, but they want to know that what they offer is something that's attractive to you. Their clients could be attractive to you. The type of attorneys that are there in the practice area, the number of people that are there should be attractive to you. And you should know, you should have a reason why that law firm is attractive to you. There's a famous study that was very funny where the reason why, like everybody wants a reason why. And this is another psychological study, but I think it's actually talked about maybe in this book called Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, or I don't think that's how to pronounce his last name. There was a study done, and these researchers there were people in line to use copiers. And so one person, the first part of this test was people would go and they would see if they could cut in line and use a copier. So they would say, can I cut here and use the copier? And probably 80% of the people said no, you can't just cut in line. And then the other study was they went and they wanted to cut in front of the person. And people would say stuff like, can I cut in front of you because my cat's sick? Or can I cut in front of you because I have a bad toe? Just stupid reasons. But when people gave a reason why, it was the exact opposite. 80% of the people said yes, even if the reason was bad. So the reason why for something, like why that firm, is very important. You need to be able to answer that. And just think back in terms of the study I just discussed with you, like why that study is so important and why that study and what that means. So reason why. And you can sometimes know people at the firm. If you do, you should speak to them before the interview. You can then talk about what they said about them, why you like the firm, and that you've taken the time to learn about the firm's culture. You have a sense of that. And so another thing that often happens is that you have to be careful about, and most attorneys these days actually understand of this rule, but you never want to say anything negative about your current organization. And as a matter of fact, the more good things you say, the better off you'll be. The more bad things you say, or the more you shade things in a negative way, the more that's going to hurt you. So always building up the people that you worked for in the past, showing the organization that if they hire you and things don't work out, you're going to say really good things about them. And very few people do this. Very few people, when they leave a firm, leave it in a way that they say, hey, thanks so much for the opportunity. I really appreciated it. I'm just very grateful for the training. Very few people do that. And it's very important because those people that you work for may become general counsels of companies. Those people that you work for will talk about you 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. So you always want to leave wherever you're going on the best possible footing. And you should never be criticizing anybody that you work for. You should always try to say good things. And it's important. Now, You can criticize the amount of work that they have and say it doesn't have enough work. You can't focus in your practice area. You can do things like that, but you can't criticize people. Talking about things like wanting to get more responsibility or greater challenges is often good. Not now you can't put yourself in a position where you say you want more responsibility if you're not going to get it, but you have to frame things in a way that firm represents some sort of a logical move for you to be moving up and to be doing better. And so just never badmouth people, always be positive and professional, always thank the firm for the opportunity and all that sort of thing. Again, this is, I've covered this already, but you want to understand about this particular firm is about. You need to be well prepared in terms of that. You need to seem competent about the organization, and you can't wing it. You need to really study the firm and think about it as much as you can. And so you need to be prepared. Why this firm? What do they offer? And not parroting back what someone said to you, but just being able to do that as well as you can and understanding everything you can. Now, I want to bring up an additional point too that's important. So when people are interviewing different firms, what will happen many times is they will go into the interview and they will read Glassdoor or reviews on Law Crossing or BCG of the firm, and they will read these reviews. And when they read these reviews, they will think negative things about the firm. So they will think, oh, someone said these bad things about it. What's important to understand is that most negative reviews are left by people that didn't do well in the firm, that weren't well received in the firm. So if you're thinking that the firm is something like that because of negative reviews, that's just not the case. Every firm has people that go there and don't work out. That's just how things work. Maybe they don't do good work. Maybe they don't connect with the people. Maybe they make mistakes. And those are the people typically that leave reviews. So I would not spend time reading negative reviews. It's going to hurt you. I remember once we were interviewing someone to be a clerk for the federal judge I was working for after the current one left. And we had this guy that we interviewed. And we're actually to interview after we graduated. I don't know. But anyway, we were interviewing this guy, and he was the first choice of the judge and my co-clerk. But he did something that got him disqualified very easily. He was talking to me I don't know, took him out to lunch or something, and when he was interviewing, and he was coming from a good law school like Penn or something, and been a summer associate at a major firm. And he said to me, or he was going to be a summer associate, he was a second, but he said, oh, I read this negative review of the judge on this thing. What do you think about that? And I defended the judge and said nice things about him, but I told the judge about it and he didn't hire him because of that. So never bring up negative things with firms that you're speaking to. Just don't do it. See a few other things, prepare in advance. And then the next thing that I spoke about is having goals when you're interviewing. So what that means is your goal always, your number one goal needs to be to advance to the next stage. So your screening interview is to get an offer. Each additional interview you have, each callback is to get to the next stage. Sometimes law firms will have multiple callbacks. If you're going to lunch or something with a dinner to move forward, you never express any doubts about the firm. You have to always look very enthusiastic because you want to get the job. That's the only goal that you have at each stage. Your goal is to get the job, and your goal is not to do anything at all that would not get you the job. Meaning saying anything negative or bringing up things that look like red flags, like talking about saying something negative about your firm, or making it look like other people are getting work and you're not, or talking about wanting to work remotely or whatever. Everything you do needs to seem positive, and you need to make a very good impression on people, and you have to avoid saying anything that will be taken in the wrong way that will disqualify you. And that's what happens. What happens when people don't get jobs after callbacks is typically they've said something to one of their interviewers that wasn't good, that made the law firm doubt whether or not the person really wanted the job, that made the law firm doubt whether or not they were doing good work with their previous firm or their current firm, that made the law firm think they might be difficult to work with, that made the law firm think that they would maybe not do good work. People do all these things in interviews that disqualify them. So you have to think about, like, how would you approach a client, and what would you say to a client to make that client want to hire you? And you certainly wouldn't say, I'm happy to represent you, but how often do you think you'll have work for me on the weekend? People just don't do that sort of thing. So you need to be very careful. So you need to know your strengths, and everybody has strong points and negative points. And so you need to think what are your strongest strengths? And everybody should be aware of what they do well. They should be aware of if they write well, they're very meticulous in transactions, if they get along well with others, whatever those things are, you need to be aware of what your strengths are. You need to always be aware of your strengths because your strengths are typically things that you gravitate towards naturally. Everybody has skills, everybody has strengths. I've yet to meet anybody that didn't have strengths. Strengths could be loyalty, strengths could be trying to get better, strengths could be a profound interest in the practice area, things, all these sorts of things. You need to have strengths. And if you're aware of your strengths, then you're going to be more confident. And these strengths are things that you can talk about often in your interviews and why you have these, what these strengths are. And just understanding what your strengths are sends you into interviews being more confident. And you're able to do much better when you talk about your strengths. So screening interview is talked about that earlier, but if you're a junior associate, often people are moving to get better experience. The reasons are generally quite similar. You'll always have a screening interview when you're trying to interview with firms, especially large firms. And all they're really doing is deciding whether or not you seem like someone that they can bring in and talk to more. Do they like you enough? Do you seem competent enough? Are you normal enough? Do you not come across as having psychological issues? And typically, screening interviews they could be handled by the recruiting coordinator, someone in HR, or they could be handled by a hiring partner or another partner. Typically, they'll ask a few questions about the person's work. So they'll try to get a sense of whether or not the candidate is interviewing because there's something wrong with the candidate losing the job, what's the problem. But typically, they're just trying to get a sense of whether or not you seem okay and that they like you and there's some sort of connection. And these interviews can be 15 minutes. You can get a call back. They can be an hour if they go really well. But the firm's just trying to understand how you do, if you seem okay. And so you try to make a good impression. If you're hardworking, dedicated, mature, and easy to work with. Now, I will tell you, and this is an important point, attorneys that get jobs at big firms when they're young, meaning when they're in law school or junior associates, they typically almost always get through screening interviews because they were able to get jobs at big firms and do the right things and think about things in a way that made them very good. And typically your attorneys with the best firms will do the best, and they will have no problem getting through screening interviews unless they're completely demoralized at the current firm. And so people just want to see you as someone usually that's hardworking, they have confidence in, and that they like. Now, another point that I just want to bring to your attention is any firm that's interviewing you for any junior associate role or mid-level associate role, they really have an objective. And their objective is to hire someone that's going to bill hours and make things easy for them, meaning that person's going to sit down and generate profit, do work, and take work off of the plate of partners or whoever's doing the work, or take work off of other mid-level associates or junior associates and create money. That's really what they care about. So they want someone that's going to sit down and do work. They don't care if you want to generate business in the future. They don't care about you, whatever your needs are. They just need someone to do the work, and they need someone to do it in a way that's easy, meaning they don't have to coddle you. They don't have to give you a lot of feedback. They just need you to be able to sit down and make them money. That's what they care about. And unfortunately, they're not that interested in you. And I would say that's even more the case with the largest firms because they pay a lot of money and people want to work there. So you have to basically come across as someone that's going to fill their needs. Now, as you get more senior, it becomes much more difficult to get a job. The candidates are typically the most marketable between their second and their fifth year, and sometimes their sixth year. The reason for that is because after about 1.5 to 2 years, you know what you're doing. You don't need a lot of feedback from people telling you what to do. They don't need to write off your hours. You're typically in a pretty good situation in terms of the law firm, in terms of what you're doing. And you're not difficult to manage. They can give you things to do and everything's fine. They don't need to worry about making you partner. And as a matter of fact, you're going to work extremely hard and build a lot of hours because presumably you want to get ahead. So you're going to be very profitable, take a lot of work off people's shoulders, and it's very easy you're the most kind of marketable as you'll ever be as someone doing work for others. As you get more senior, though, things change. As you get into like your seventh or eighth year, the work you're doing you start becoming to some extent, you're much harder to get a position. The reason being, a senior associate or a more senior associate is doing work that partners could also do, meaning work that is billed out at a high billable hour. Most clients prefer work that's done at a high billable hour to be done by the partner that has a relationship with the client. So it becomes hard to get work because of that. Other reasons to do with compensation. Also, if you're a senior associate, there may be other senior associates at the firm that have been there since they're summer associates that are also competing to be partners. So that can demoralize people that are there. It's always been that way, and there's nothing that it's never going to change as far as I know. It's very difficult comparatively to get a job as you get more senior. Now, again, senior associates are hired all the time. I'm not saying they're not hired, but at the same time, it's probably 5 times more difficult for a senior associate to get a position than it is not. And the senior associate, the demand for them can be different in different markets. So it can be different depending on the economy. So if the economy is really strong for bankruptcy, for example, major great US law firm like Milbank might bring in someone with 15 years of experience. But it depends on the market. And you need to be able to sell different things as a senior associate as you would than as a junior associate. So a senior associate may be brought in and given clients that they can work with. And they need to be able to, they may be managing client relationships. And the law firm needs to believe they can give them things to do, and they just don't even have to worry about it. The client, the senior associate will work with the clients effectively. They'll do the work. They'll give work to junior associates, and they can handle the ground running, that they're going to do good work. They don't need any supervision. And they can go right in, blend in the social structure, all these sorts of things. So senior associates are evaluated a little differently, typically, and it's just how it is. The law firms aren't as nice to them as they are as a mid-level associate interviewing. It's much more difficult. There's often ghosting where they'll interview and then no one will make a decision. It just becomes much more difficult as you get more senior. And senior associates really need to come in and act like they need to look very malleable. They need to be able to connect and look like they're going to do good work and work hard, and that they have potential. This is another thing. I was talking to an attorney this morning, and another thing that happens as people get more senior, especially senior associates, partners, older attorneys, is they start thinking they know how to do everything. They're often a little bit resentful because they know they're not going to make partner. They don't want to work as hard as they did when they're young. They become resentful that they may be reporting to people that are younger than them, that are partners. There's all these problems that happen. So, and then it's just, there's lots of issues with hiring senior people. As a senior associate, one of the most important things I can recommend as you get more senior, as you just basically need to look like you're going to work very hard, easy to manage, you'll do what they need. A lot of times senior associates don't want to bill as many hours as they do when they're young, especially if they think they're never going to get ahead. All these things are important, and there's just a lot going on. It's much more difficult. So you need to be really on the ball for interviewing as a senior associate. And as I covered a lot of this stuff already. Give me one second. Okay, and then partner candidates, everything is different. So partner candidates are evaluated in a couple different ways. One way the partner candidates are evaluated is if they're senior associates, if they don't have any work. But the more senior a partner candidate is, the more difficult it can be for them to get a job. And it's very unfortunate. I've seen partner candidates, partners that were major US law firms in New York and other markets apply to 300 or 400 law firms or corporate practices and maybe get 2 interviews. It can be very difficult for partners to get positions if they don't have any business. And if they do have business, it's much easier because you are going to be evaluated based on your business and then the clients you have, and then whether or not those clients and that business can be supported by that firm, and whether or not the firm likes you. And this is the goal. It should be the goal for every associate, mid-level associate, and senior associate, is to run your career in such a way that you're going to have business and be able to sell yourself to firms. And it's the big switch that happens, and what you should be preparing for mentally from the second year in law school, second year looking for jobs in law school, is you initially you're working for law firms. And what that means is you're working for the law firms, they're giving you work. And then once you start getting enough business, then what happens is the law firm's working for you. The law firm's giving you a brand, the law firm's giving you associates and paralegals and secretaries and office space and computers and all this stuff. And then as a for percentage of whatever business you're bringing in, and you can get usually about 1/3 of the revenue generated as a partner, sometimes a lot more, sometimes less. The law firm will provide all that for you. So you want to be in a position where the law firm is working for you. Law firms will ask partner candidates, will ask them about the portable business. There'll be these long kind of partner questionnaires about business, about clients, about billing rates of clients, like how much the partners have generated over the past several years. And they'll look at what you generated this year, what you generated last year. They'll try to see a pattern. Typically, you want to have upward, you want that amount of business to constantly be increasing. The more that business increases, the better investment you look like. You are, when a private equity company or venture capital company is evaluating investments, what they look for is something that's got an upward trajectory. It's moving up, it's increasing, and the amount of money coming to the business is increasing. So they evaluate partners in the same way. Are you getting bigger clients? How are things going? So that's the goal. The goal is to be on an upward trajectory. An upward trajectory for a partner is going to be based on the amount of business that they have usually and how the business is increasing. And so our firms that need partners that don't have business to do work and to take over and manage client relationships, and there are firms that have a lot of work that they can bring in partners, and those partners they can hire them as partners even if the partner doesn't have business. So you need to be in a position where you're able to sell special talents, but also where your personality can fit in with the firm. I'll tell you about one placement I made very early in my career. I had a candidate that was a securities attorney. He was a partner, and he'd been out of work for maybe 1.5 or 2 years. And he was in Chicago, and he couldn't find a position. And I was able to place him at what now is K&L Gates, I think, but it was Preston Gates and Ellis, because they had a securities attorney there. It was in Seattle, had gone to work as the personal securities attorney for Bill Gates in Seattle, where Microsoft was. And this guy got this position doing all the firm's securities work, and he was there for a long time, I think like at least 15 years, but I was able to get a great position as a partner without any business. So the other thing that's important when you go into interviews is you need to be able to show enthusiasm. And what that means is you need to look like you're someone that wants to work there and you're enthusiastic about it and you don't feel beaten down. You're excited to be there. And people like people that like them. And so law firms like people that like them and are enthusiastic, because that goes a long way. So you want to look like someone that looks like they like them. And one poor interview, literally, if you don't have a level of enthusiasm, it can change everything for you. And so you need to think like a lawyer in every interview. You need to be able to give people confidence. And what does that mean? So clients will hire attorneys that they like the best. They will often, then you would do the same thing. If you were looking for an attorney for someone and you were accused of some kind of crime, and you were interviewing 3 criminal attorneys, and you would probably hire the one that you liked the best, the one that had the most enthusiasm, that said they could help you, that really looked like they wanted this and they wanted what you did and it was something for them. So you need to stay positive and composed, and you need to act like you really the job and want to do it. And because a lot of people will come in, and it's very common as well, and they won't look like they're that enthusiastic. So every interviewer has a veto, and every interviewer can not hire you if they choose to. So one person that doesn't think you really want the job and that you don't have something that sets you apart can hurt you. And people are noticing all these different things. They're noticing your handshake, the eye contact you make, your voice, your confidence, composure. One year I was needed a junior attorney, like someone that was right out of law school, to work. I had a small law firm in addition to running BCG, Law Crossing, but I had a small law firm, and that law firm was representing, I needed to hire a junior attorney. So I contacted the UCLA Career Services office, and they sent me a bunch of resumes of people to interview. And I got all these resumes, and then there was one guy there that had been on law review and board of the COIF and everything at UCLA, and he was one of the first people I interviewed. And when I interviewed him, he came in, and I was like, I was wondering when I was interviewing, why didn't this guy get a job? And he had this cold, horrible handshake where his hand was just like, it was like mush and it was cold. And he didn't make eye contact. He didn't sit up straight. And he said the wrong things in the interview. And so this poor guy, even though he was an incredible student and should have been at a major US law firm, wasn't doing all this. So you need to think that you really want it. You look the part. You need to also appear confident. If you were, again, any law firm that's interviewing you is looking at you as someone that can represent them effectively. They want that person as your client. How would you act if you were going out pitching a client trying to get a job? You need to think about that. You need to look confident. You need to be enthusiastic, and you need to project self-confidence. The lawyers that project the most self-confidence are the ones that get hired, because think about it. You need to look a certain way to get hired. You need to act a certain way to get hired. You need to look like the kind of lawyer you would want representing you. The lawyers that look the most self-confident, you would want someone going against an opponent of yours, whether it's a prosecutor, whether it's someone on the other side of the transaction, whether it's someone in litigation. You would want to have the most self-confident lawyer that looks like the best for the job. And so you need to be able to do that. You need to be someone that they can see that they would want to send into client meetings where you look like someone that can do the work, that looks like the right person for the job. And so you need to have the right attitude. And this is incredibly important. This is where so many things go sideways when people don't look self-confidence. You need to work on your self-confidence. There are books about how to work on your self-confidence. Think and Grow Rich has a whole self-confidence section where you concentrate on that every day. There's all of this stuff that can help you look and act more self-confidence, and you can do self-hypnosis. But confidence is incredibly important. It's one of the most important things. So there's studies that have been done on who are the men that women like the most. And if you get beyond looks and things, it's often the men that are the most self-confident. There's been all sorts of psychological studies and things about attorneys you hire would have one confidence. You need to look like that when you're going into interviews. And often many people make so many mistakes by not looking self-confident and not looking like someone that can do the work. There's doubts about their ability to do certain things, all these sorts of things. And you need to also dress well. You need to look like the best dressed person that would give the best impression to clients, and all of this stuff, incredibly important. And so you get in the door based on what's in your resume, and then you get out and then you get the job based on doing other things. And so there's also selling yourself. An interview is about selling, and the attorneys that are the most successful are the ones that are very good at selling. I had this interesting thing happen several years ago. I was working with a law firm and a very successful attorney at a law firm I was in the Bay Area, and he was extremely successful, a very good attorney. And his firm wanted help with strengthening an office, I believe, in Los Angeles, and hiring good people for that office. And I went to or I just had a Zoom conference or something with two attorneys that were in that office that had some of the most remarkable qualifications, and one of them top valedictorian at a top 5 law school, just incredible pedigrees. And I went and I was talking to them, and these guys started making fun of some articles I'd written on my blog, Harrison Barnes, and like negative things about me. And then so the meeting didn't go well. And so I called this guy that had me talk to them, that was trying to recruit attorneys for that office. And he basically said, there's all these attorneys in this firm and other ones I've been in, and there's people that don't believe that they need to sell, that people that just believe that other people should be giving the work. And these guys aren't the most successful people in the firm. I am, but I sell everybody. I meet with everybody I can, I sell everybody, and these guys don't sell, they get work from me. And that whole idea of selling yourself, incredibly important, because many attorneys don't do that. As a matter of fact, I would say there used to be psychology in the whole legal profession, like billboards and any type of selling wasn't allowed. You couldn't sell. And so all this stuff about selling is just very important. And so many attorneys are uncomfortable with selling when it's one of the most important things you can do. Everyone needs to understand how to sell. And the better you understand how to sell, the better off you're going to be. So who sells themselves? So if you got your current job, you somehow sold yourself. Maybe you got the job that you got that's not as good as you got because you didn't sell yourself enough. you had to sell yourself based on offering something, whether it was your grades or an essay to get into law school. When you meet other people and friends and things, you try to sell yourself by what you have in common, by being nice to them, by presenting your best self. People do that with relationships with significant others, whether or not you're whatever type of relationship you're in with someone that becomes your significant other, you are selling yourself to them when you meet them. You're putting your best foot forward. You're not saying negative things about them. You're trying to be nice about yourself. You're trying to be likable. You're trying to make them like you. You do all these things and then get flowers. Who knows? Take out nice dates, women, whatever. But people are selling themselves. If you fail to sell yourself, then you're not going to do well. People that can't sell themselves to romantic partners are single. People that don't sell themselves to other people to be friends don't have a lot of friends. People that don't get jobs don't sell themselves. So selling is one of the most important components of your existence as an attorney and as a person. You need to sell yourself, and you're not going to get, if you can't sell yourself, you're not going to go as far as you can. Think about politicians, whether it's Trump or whoever. That's what they do. They sell themselves. Trump for example, has been selling himself for since the 1980s, the books and all this stuff. People try to sell themselves, and it goes far. And if you sell yourself, you look much stronger. You need to basically think about, what do I need to do to look better? What do I need to do? How do I sell myself? What did I do often? How did I sell myself? What did I do right in different relationships to sell myself and bond with people? What did I do? How did I present value? And so, extremely important. You need to, how can you sell yourself? And you don't want to go over the top and talk about yourself and bore people, but you need to be in the mindset that you need to be selling yourself. And the other thing about appearances, some people will literally wear a coat and tie everywhere they go during the day. Trump used to do that, for example. Sorry to keep bringing that guy up, but there's certain rules that you can follow to be successful. Now, I'm not dressed up for this. I probably should be, but looking the best you possibly can in an interview, meaning your clothes fit, you're wearing a good suit or a nice dress, whatever, looking professional. You need to look extremely as professional as you possibly can, because you are a representative of that firm, and that's what they want to see you as, is someone that's a representative of that firm. So are you beaten down and a frumpy representative of that firm, or are you someone that is doing everything you can to look the best? And someone that shows up for a Zoom interview in a coat and tie and being well groomed is going to do often, this makes a good impression. Same thing when they go into an interview. So you want to look very polished. I'll tell you one quick story. I was a summer associate in a law firm, in a major law firm in New York. And then one day, this partner gave this kind of presentation about getting business. And he was the one that had the most business in the entire firm and a huge book of business at that time. And he said something that always stuck with me. He was always immaculately dressed, but he said something. He said that when I walk into a room, I need to look like the best dressed, most competent person there with clients, because I'm the representative. I'm the representative of that company. And they want to have the best look, the best dress, the best, most professional looking representative of that company. So men, clean suit, pressed shirt, appropriate tie, shine shoes. Your shoes need to be shine. And if you're going in, what does that mean? I was this partner. I was at another New York law firm in Los Angeles, and there was a very important partner there that was representing Texaco's oil company, and had this huge case coming in, and he was taking me out to lunch to groom me to go out and potentially do a secondment to this company and help them manage some small litigation. And so he was taking me out to lunch to basically size me up for the job. And I'll never forget, he came to my office to meet me. I got up and I walked to the door of my office and said hi to him. And he looked down at my shoes, and he had looked very enthusiastic as he walked in. But when he saw my shoes, he frowned a little bit. And I'll never forget that, because he was basically, even something as simple as shine shoes, he didn't like that for me to be a representative. It was funny. I actually said later when I was at lunch with him that, listen, I understand what you're trying, it won't happen again. But literally something like that. Or I remember I was joining this club in Los Angeles, my name was on trouble, but years ago, like 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. And it was this very kind of old school club. And it was the same thing. I went to this membership dinner, and there was the head of the membership looked down at my shoes and they weren't shining. So you need to work on that. You need to, people don't get jobs because of their appearances, and facial hair, and tattoos, and earrings, and all these sorts of things. So you need to look your best when you go into interviews. Same women, men, everything, but not cologne and perfume. Your clothes need to look conservative, and you need to look like someone, again, that could represent the law firm. And people will judge you how you look. They will, it's unfortunate. Now, you don't need to be the best looking person. You don't need to be the most fit person. You just need to dress as well as you can and look the best you can in these interviews. And it's important that you need to look confident, polished, like someone that could represent clients well. When I was, my first job out of law school was with Quinn Emanuel. And at the time, Quinn was the first firm, only firm to have a suit optional, that you could wear shorts and everything to interviews. And it was interesting because you're recruiting the Yale Law School, you could get Harvard Law School, like all these people that were coming in that were awesome. It was a smaller firm back then. It was like maybe 50 attorneys. But when they were recruiting, they were bringing in these people, and people would show up in coat and ties and look very professional. And sometimes people would show up in shorts or jeans and just not looking professional. And even though these people at Quinn were dressing that way in the office, the partners and the associates, that they didn't go that way to court. They didn't look like that when they met with clients. And so people that came in, they would think, oh, I can dress casually for this interview. And none of those people got jobs because they weren't respecting the firm. They weren't looking like clients. They would want to look like clients. So a couple other things. These are just some pointers about what people are looking for. Associates that are, especially associates at your level. So if you're like a first, second, or third year associate, interviewing with first, second, or third year associate, those associates want people that you need to look likable and someone that could be their friend, someone that's not competitive with them. So you can't go in and try to look like you're like completely gung ho and you're going to do better than whoever you're going to be, whoever is interviewing you, because they're competing with you. So you need to look nice, easy to get along with, someone that could be their friend. And it's important to try to bond with people to the extent you can at that stage. And if associates don't like you, then the firm won't hire you. So you need to look like someone that will work well with them, that like them, that will be fun. And they're literally looking for friends most of the time. They're often, they care about your qualifications. So if you're interviewing with a firm where everyone's at good law schools and you went to a good law school, they will like that. If you're interviewing with a firm you didn't go to a good law school and didn't do particularly well there, then they won't like you because they want to feel that they're working with peers. But you want to look friendly, mature, easy to work with. You don't want to try to impress people, like looking overly competitive. You don't want to appear threatening. You want to be seen as someone that's a colleague, a friend, not a competitor, someone that's easy to get along with. Now, everyone doesn't need to be your friend, but you need to see someone that they would like to work with. I was talking to a firm once. I couldn't believe it. I actually had a friend that was doing hiring for a law firm in Los Angeles. And he said, we interviewed this person, but then after interviewing them, we realized that we have a certain type of culture. And it was based around a certain religion that everybody was at that firm. It was a decent sized firm, but all the associates were of a certain religion. And they didn't feel like that person would get along with them. It's crazy reasons, but people will look at you in a lot of different ways. Now, if you're an associate interviewing with a partner, the partner is actually looking for people that are very motivated, that will create competition in the firm with other associates, will raise the bar, that will work really hard, that they're going to focus on your grades and talent, your work ethic, but they want people that are going to work hard. So you need to look, when you're interviewing with partners, if you're an associate, extremely competitive. You look the exact opposite oftentimes when you're interviewing with associates. Now, people are not friends. You have to, when you're associate interviewing with another associate, you have to not make assumptions. You have to be very careful of what you say, but you have to come across as pleasant and a nice person and likable. Whereas the partners are more interested in people that are going to be hardworking, that are going to make them money, that are going to have long-term potential, that are going to try the best that they can. But the partners do care about whether or not the associates like you, because there's cultural fit and they want to keep the culture in a certain way. Now, there's a couple different things I want to go over real quickly. There's firms will hire based on how you perform in interviews, the resumes, what gets you in the door. But what happens is there's different types of people that they interview. One of them is losers. And there are people, and I hate to use that term, but your job really is to prove that you're not a loser. And there's different categories of people that law firms interview. there's losers and there's cruisers and there's grinders. And cruisers and grinders get hired, losers are rejected. And every law firm interviews people that are losers. And what does a loser do? A loser will often act inappropriately during the job interview. They will talk in too much detail about different things and not connect. They may appear uninterested in the work. They may appear difficult to manage. And what that means is they will appear to be someone that doesn't take instruction well, that wants to do things too much their own way, that maybe there's signs that they had problems with past supervisors, that maybe they got fired for something, that maybe people weren't giving them enough work, that maybe they move between jobs too much because of problems with their work. And so law firms are going to be very cautious about that. People that are too arrogant, people that just don't look like they're really meant to do this, people that ask questions about things that have nothing to do with or disqualify them, and don't seem like they're willing to work hard, want to work remotely too much, or don't want certain hours, that are looking down and not at the interviewer when they're talking. And people, when law firms see stuff like that, they believe that the candidate isn't going to do well there, and that they're not the kind of person that they would want representing them. And so there's lots of people like that. So just think about someone that's failing, someone that's not interested, someone that interviews poorly, someone that looks like they had problems with their past firms, someone that may have been fired, someone that has moved between jobs, maybe because of the quality of the work, someone that's unfocused. What are you doing that's making you a negative candidate? What is that person doing? What have people done in firms that you've been in that's caused them to get fired, to get isolated, to not do well? And so there are people in every law firm that are losers. I've worked in law firms where when I was working at Quinn, I was doing like 2,800 hours a year. There were people that went to better law schools than me, that had better grades than me, that had more potential than me, that were working 1,000 hours a year because people weren't giving them work. They didn't like them. They were doing things wrong. And so there are losers in every firm. I was at one firm, my second firm, this big New York firm. There was an attorney that, for whatever reason, they didn't fire people, but he hadn't had any work in over a year. He was just sitting in his office, and I was doing 2,300 hours. They didn't like him. There's losers. And so you have to, and again, just because you're a loser now doesn't mean you're going to be always a loser. But law firms are going to avoid people that look like they're not doing well and have problems, are difficult to manage, don't want the job, don't fit in well, that aren't likable, all those things. So you just need to do everything you possibly can to not be a loser. And what do you do, by the way, if you're a loser? Everyone should be studying what are the signs of people, what are people doing that makes them successful? What do partners do? What do senior associates do that are successful? You look at what people are doing, how they act, what they think, how they interact with others, how they do their work, how they show up, and you look at people that are going to do well. Now, most candidates, I would say a strong percentage of them, are what I call cruisers. And a cruiser is what the majority of people that are interviewed for jobs. It's more than 50%. These are people that are competent in their jobs. They do good work. There's nothing that bad to criticize, but they're just not incredibly enthusiastic. They're employees and they're not treating their jobs any differently. They're not showing a lot of exceptional enthusiasm. That's just not something that is what they're doing. And they often have very good backgrounds. They could have gone to the best law schools. They could be in the best, very top firms in the country. They're capable of doing good work. If they applied themselves, they could develop clients. Some of them may not do that, but because they're not quite enthusiastic enough, they can often make partners in major U.S. law firms without any business, that sometimes. And they're decent candidates, but they don't have this fierce drive and ambition. They can get hired, but they're not always the most desirable. And law firms want people who show commitment and intensity. I'll never forget, I had a candidate. He was in North Carolina and maybe Charlotte, and had a job in a real estate or corporate department of a major U.S. law firm. And he'd gone to a great law school, I think Duke or something, or Virginia, I don't remember, but gone to a great law school, had every potential to look like someone that could succeed. And he got into this law firm and did a couple things wrong. The first was he took maternity leave, which, sorry, but most law firms don't like that, especially for men. And it's almost like they do it and then the law firm stops giving them work when they come back because they don't respect. I don't know what it is, but he did that. But the main thing is he asked for feedback one time, and he was at the firm and he wasn't happy. And the feedback he got was, hey, you look at the people that are here and look at you. They are so gung-ho. They're trying to do the absolute best work they can. They're competing to get more work. They're working as hard as they can. They're working weekends. They're showing up. They're very enthusiastic. They want to get ahead. And then look at you. You're just coasting. You're not trying to do the best work you can all the time. You're often waiting for people to give you assignments and not getting assignments. It doesn't seem like you love this stuff. And look at the people also at your class level and how they're behaving. And just to give you an idea of why this guy was a cruiser, I was able to get him a job in a smaller firm as a real estate associate. And I was very proud of myself. And I told him what to say and how to act. But then he got this job and he was about ready to start there. It was like a week away. And then he called me and he said, hey, my friend's opening this law firm to do litigation. And I think I'm going to do that just because I think I'll be happier just doing it. And so he just kind of got off the trail and did that. I had another guy also in the South, and the same thing happened to him. He was at a big firm. I don't know if it was Charlotte or maybe Atlanta, and same thing. He didn't have all this enthusiasm and things. And then the law firm said to him, you just don't have the same drive and ambition as other people you're working with, and therefore we're letting you go. And he applied to a ton of places, and then he went out and got interviews and went into the interviews and didn't have any enthusiasm and things. And he ended up moving to New York City to be a contract attorney. It was the only job he could get, or a staff attorney at some firms. Very sad. So if you don't have this enthusiasm and you're a cruiser, you have to have enthusiasm for the work. But most attorneys are cruisers. They're just doing average amount of work. Now, this cruisers also, by the way, do competent work. They're good, but they're just not exceptional. And then you have other candidates that are what are called grinders. And these are people that law firms actually like. They want to become the best at what they do. They'll work incredibly hard. They'll bill a lot of hours. They'll do good work. And they'll try to fit in socially. They'll basically be dedicated to doing the best possible work they can. Clients love grinders. Law firms love grinders. Everybody wants grinders. Back to Quinn. John Quinn developed a huge book of business and was able to build Quinn & Mannions, 1,000+ attorney firm, from nothing. Then he would go out and when he would meet with clients, even when he was a young attorney starting his firm, and would say, if you give me this case, I will eat, drink, and think it. It will be the most important thing in the world to me. And I will make sure that I do everything I possibly can to get you the best results. Very few attorneys do that. And he developed a huge firm basically by having a psychology where he did that with everybody. And so this is what the best law firms are looking for. They want people that have a lot of ambition, that are trying to do whatever they can, that will seek out clients, that'll be coaching, willing to improve. They're not just going to stand there and accept the weaknesses. They're going to take feedback very seriously and be willing to improve. I had this grinder candidate. She's back. She was in a law firm doing this kind of transactional practice area as a data privacy or something, and doing very well and billing 2,800 hours a year. And she would go into these reviews and they would give her these incredible reviews and just say, you're doing amazing. She was writing all these papers and giving talks and just exceptional, and went to great law school. And finally she said, I keep giving all this positive feedback. What could I possibly get better at? What is my one weakness? What can I do better? And so we're a good writer, but maybe you could become a little bit better writer. So this woman then went out and got a federal clerkship, even though she was doing kind of transactional work and had published all these papers, to get more feedback on her writing so she could have a quote from a judge. This is the kind of stuff that grinders do, unless she wasn't interesting. So grinders receive the most offers. People want hardworking, adaptable people. They're desirable, and it's important. So losers, typically law firms are looking for that. And cruisers, same thing. They know that most people that they're interviewing are cruisers, and then grinders get the best positions. So I'll talk a little bit more about questions in this a little bit long of a webinar, but I think all this material is extremely important because if you understand, you're going to do better. There is a lot to cover, but it is important. You have questions. If you don't have questions, then law firms don't like that. Some people say, I think I got all I need. You have to actually ask questions. I told you the questions. I told you that you have to ask questions about what you can do and how you could help them. You need to prepare questions before the interview, and you should have questions that make you look good. You can ask questions about the practice if you want. You can ask questions about staffing if you want. But here's some of the questions that people typically ask about staff. They're up in different departments, subdivided, like some of these stuff, and what responsibilities, there's different things like that. And these are questions that typically people will ask, but in general, my best advice in addition to these questions is about what you can do for people, how you can help them. You can ask associates all these sorts of questions, but typically questions need to make you look strong, like you want to work there. And the other thing is when you ask questions, you're basically setting up a dynamic. And so that dynamic is how are you connecting with the people there? How are you, is there like a positive vibe that's being created? Are your questions things that are where they're going to be able to give answers that make the firm feel good about itself? Or are you asking questions that are going to make people feel badly about themselves? And are you asking questions that make it look like you want to help the firm? Or are you asking questions that are going to make it look like they should be helping you? So you don't ask questions about compensation. You don't ask questions about hours. You don't ask questions about remote work. You don't ask questions about you ask questions that basically make the people think that you really want to work there and that you're going to be someone that does good work when you get there. Hours are people I don't think they're important to ask. I don't like these questions that I'm over on this PowerPoint. You don't ask about partnership. You don't ask about hours. Probably don't want to ask about governance, associates, valuations, all this stuff. You shouldn't be asking about training, mentorship. That's another one I've seen people say, oh, why do you want to leave your firm? I want more mentorship. And then they go into firms and they ask about mentorship. Mentorship is not a good question because you're basically saying, I need someone to hold my hand and help me because I can't do it on my own. And that's not, so those aren't always good questions. And there's a lot of stuff. I do not like these questions. You don't ask about salary. You don't ask about the stability of the firm. You just don't do that. And a couple other things, being nervous. Some people have that problem. I don't think it's a major problem for most people. But if you are nervous, you need to just remember that it's important to look like you're confident. Clients want confidence. And so you need to be that way. Being a little nervous is often good because people like when people are really want to work there and they're trying to do the best job. But you just have to be aware of that can be a problem. And then these are just some additional rules I talked to you about not badmouthing your present employer, not talking specifically about individual clients is important. Honesty is important. So people will often shade the truth, will be dishonest about things, will over talk about their experience. So just remember to be honest and to answer questions truthfully, people like that. So it's okay to have some weaknesses, meaning people don't like people that try to look nothing but awesome. They like people that have some negatives associated with them. I was at a conference years ago and there was a speaker that got up on stage and he started off by saying, hey, I got into Princeton when I was 17. I was an incredible student there. I was captain of the football team. Also, I got almost a perfect grade point average. And I went to Harvard Business School without any experience. And by the time I was 28, I was in the investment bank making over $1 million a year. And I've written 2 bestsellers. And this is how he introduced himself. And then he said, that's one version of me. Here's another version of me. I grew up in West Virginia. And I didn't know my father. I was raised by my mother. I was in a family of 7 kids. She was on welfare. I told myself that I had to get into the best possible college. And the only way I could do that was by being the best possible student. And I knew that football could also help me. And so I did everything I possibly could. And I worked very hard. When I got to school, I couldn't pay for everything. So I worked very hard in the summer. So I was spending money. And then when I got into this, so we talked about something that would give you more, make you connect with him more, like him more. And so if you think about these two people, like one version is very likable and the other, you just say, oh, this person is not someone that I like. Sour grapes means just having anger and negativity. So people don't like that. Everything has to appear positive. And then you don't reach conclusions for people. You say things that make them conclude certain things about you in a positive way, but you don't force conclusions. So it's not your job to tell people I'm valuable, you should hire me because I do a lot of hours and I do good work. You say things like what I like about What I've done well is people give me a lot of work. I have the highest hours of all the associates in my department. And you allow people to reach conclusions about what you say. So people do not like being force-fed conclusions. You also need to look at your resume for weaknesses. And most resumes are actually fairly negative. They don't look as strong as they possibly could. And the reason is because they're often talking about different practice areas. They don't emphasize their current experience enough. They contain associations and all these different things that have nothing to do with the work that the person's doing. And the attorney just doesn't look, they're giving all these signals about their different personal things on the resume. And so it can send people sideways. Your resume is just a document to get people to hire you. And so it shouldn't talk about things that basically you don't have any weaknesses. If you're in the top half of your law school class, you don't talk about it. If you got the best grade, or if you were on Dean's List one semester, 2 semesters, you don't talk about it. You only want to look like the absolute best you can. So you should be talking about one practice area. You should be not having anything that makes people think you're not focused on your practice area, like associations or activities in law school. Everything should be about one practice area, what you're doing, why you're good. And if things aren't about that, then that's a problem. And I'm not going to talk too much about your resume, but you need to look at your resume and say, do I look committed to what I'm trying to do? How would someone look at this? What would they think of me? And you need to basically look like you're very professional and can do whatever the job is. And that's important. You need to look at your resume very closely with a fine-tooth comb in order to do very well. And resumes are a whole different question. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I don't want to spend time. But you really need to, if you haven't done so, review my resume workshops. I will do one hopefully in the near future, but you need to do that. The other thing you need to do is you need to make sure that your answers are short, concise, and to the point. And I'll tell you one of the biggest mistakes that I made. When I was in law school, I got all these interviews. I probably had plus maybe more on-campus interviews after my first year of law school. And out of those interviews, I only ended up getting one call back, and I got a couple of calls, but one job. And the job that I got, I went in and by stroke of luck, my best friend in high school had been extremely good friends and still was in touch with the hiring partner of this New York law firm. We made that connection right when I went in. And all we talked about was this woman. And then he called this woman and my friend's mother, and she said great things about me. And I got a job. I went into my other interviews and I talked about all this academic research I'd done at the University of Chicago. I talked in great detail about my asphalt business. I just thought it was a chance to talk about myself and give all these long answers. And that hurt me. And then I learned after interviewing a lot of people when I was a clerk and thinking back about what I did wrong, that people don't want that. They just want very short, direct answers. And that's what the best lawyers do. The best lawyers don't write a 50-page memo about some legal issue. They're just very focused and they reach conclusions quickly. And that's what judges need. And that's what clients need. And they don't need people to ramble on. So you need to learn how to be very direct and focused in your answers. And again, know your audience. That's another thing. I'm not going to talk too much about that. Getting too relaxed, meaning acting like the person's your friend, or you can say something informal to them. You can be talking about your personal life. You have to be careful about that. And you have to you don't want to appear informal. And you need to basically be very professional until you get the job and until you start working with these people. So you have to be very careful. You can't look like there's any issues with you. The firm needs to believe you'll do good work. People need to be on time. This is not something that you should automatically understand. Recruiting meals are another thing. People often lose jobs because of that. This is very serious. Again, you can't get too close to people there. Often they're testing you in interview to see how you would do with clients. And so you need to be careful with that. If you're waiting for a host, if you're meeting somewhere, someplace, you need to wait in the lobby or not sit down yet. That's important. You need to watch your pacing, not eating at the same pace as or faster than other people or too slow. And so you don't eat until other people eat, you eat at the same pace. You don't order things that are difficult, you can spill. Typically, if you're the first to order, don't order an appetizer or dessert. If other people are ordering, you need to basically order a similar way that they do. You don't want to order things that are more expensive than other people are ordering. You don't want to order things that you can spill. So people are watching that. They're watching how you talk to the interview. So I had a guy not too long ago It was a strange thing. He was a trademark attorney in Las Vegas, and he got an interview with a firm, I don't know where it was, like Atlanta, to be a trademark attorney. And he went to this, everything was going great. They were going to make him an offer. They just took him out to lunch, and he got a call on his cell phone and went and disappeared for 5 minutes. And just because of that, they didn't hire him. Things like that can make a big difference. And then treating people with a lot of respect, so being nice to the meal servers, and how do you treat people that are below you? Because that is stuff that could happen with legal secretaries. And so they're looking at that and listening to people. So it's more important to listen than it is to talk. In reality, in your interviews, and we're almost done with this, just a few more slides, but it's generally a good idea. Like things, you can think things are going well when the people that are interviewing you are talking about 80% of the time, and you're talking about 20% of the time. There's one of my mentors, I told this story before. He got on a plane once and he was sitting next to this guy, and he thought, I'm going to see what happens if I just ask this guy about himself and listen the entire time. So he was a flight from Los Angeles to New York or something, and the flight was 5 hours, and he did nothing but ask him questions about himself and say that was interesting. The guy didn't ask him a single question about himself. And then at the end of the flight, the guy said, this has been the most interesting conversation I've had in a long time. Could I have your card? I'd love to stay in touch. And so very few people listen. And most people are concerned about the next thing that they're going to say. So you need to always listen. You need to let other people talk. And if they talk, then that's a good sign because people want to talk about themselves. So let other people talk about themselves. And you need to be a good listener. That was a mistake that I made with early interviews. You need to hear what people are saying. You need to talk in terms of what they're interested in, and you need to understand what they need. Again, interviews are very important. What you do, I think I've covered a ton of things here about interviewing that will help you. I hope that you can learn. You've learned a lot from what I've talked about in terms of if the law firms, the people you're interviewing are clients, how to behave, and all of this stuff. I will also circulate this PowerPoint to everyone that attended today after the webinar. And again, I apologize if this is a little bit long, this interview preparation webinar, but I think in terms of the importance of this issue, it's one of the most important things. And I would hope that it can make a meaningful difference on the quality of your life. Because if you can go from 1 out of 8 jobs you interview for to 6, 7 out of 8, then you're way ahead of the game and ahead of what most people do. And people that understand the stuff do that. And yeah, I think it's great that you watch this today. We'll take a quick break just for a couple minutes. And then when I come back, I'll do questions. This is a live webinar, so I should be able to answer all your questions and anything you have questions about from this presentation or just questions in general. I think questions are also one of the most valuable parts of the webinar because people will ask questions that I may not have answered in the discussion, and also that you can hopefully learn a lot because I've been doing this for so long and seeing what people do right and what people do wrong. Just give me 1 second and we'll be back. And yeah, I hope this has helped you taking notes, and I will circulate this after. And I also have an interview guide that I can send that I go over with BCG candidates. It's not something that is public, but I think I can also send that to everyone here since you've taken the time to watch this. So I'll be back in just a second. Thanks. Okay, the first question. This isn't something that's applied to a lot of people, but it's about CLA. So what should attorneys do if they're worried about missing CLA requirements or falling on plans to state bar? So there's a lot of online programs you can take to do that. But typically, if you have a weekend to do that, you can watch videos, and then typically what happens is that there's questions that pop up. The test if you're still there during the videos that you're watching, and that's not. I wouldn't worry too much about that if you have the time. There's tons of companies you can find online. This is good. This is a good question. How should I answer why BigLaw if I want to sound thoughtful instead of prestige focused? So the reason you go to BigLaw, this is really the main reason, and this is what I concluded after having done this for so long. The reason to go to the major law firms is not because of the pay, and people will often think of things that way. The reason you want to go to the largest law firms is because they represent the largest clients, and the largest clients can afford to pay for people to do the best possible work. And the better the firm, like if you go to Wachtell or Sullivan Cromwell, for example, the more sophisticated the work is going to be, the higher quality the work's expected to be. So you go to the largest law firms because you want to be able to do the most sophisticated work and get the best training. The attorneys from those firms typically have the best pedigrees and do the best work and have the largest clients. And so being able to get training at the best firms is really the goal. And people focus so much on their compensation the first several years out of law school, and that's fine, but you shouldn't think of yourself as an employee. You should think of yourself as a student when you're a young attorney. And as a student, you want to get the access to the best work and the best training. So when you go to the largest law firms, they do things right, meaning their details better. They look at matters in much more depth. They anticipate problems. They do all these things, and the clients can afford to pay these rates because the largest clients, where that wouldn't happen at smaller law firms that aren't big law most of the time. So it doesn't mean good work's not done at smaller law firms and excellent work, but in general, you want to get access to the best work. You want to get the best training. You want to become the best attorney. You want to work on the biggest matters, the biggest cases, the biggest transactions. That's why people should often go to the biggest firms. Resume keywords. Let me just see here. Okay. I am actually very proud to have done this article, which doesn't look like it's getting a ton of traffic. Let me just see. Let me make sure this is the right article. This is about practice area and resume keywords. Let me just give me 1 second. I have to find the exact article because I spent a lot of time preparing something related to resume keywords. Let me just find this. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I love this one. So this is something called resume keywords by practice area. And I'm actually very glad I found this. So I found it just by doing, and this is, in my opinion, a great article. So let me just show you this real quick and what it does. So practice area. I'll just show this to you. Yeah, I need to start promoting this article quite a bit. I don't know why I haven't. This particular article, it enables you to see all the different keywords that you can put in your resume for different practice areas. So for education, for example, you put in these sorts of things. Very, very good question. And this is something that I hope you'll use. You can search by practice area. You can search by what sort of keywords belong in your resume, depending on what type of experience you have. So this is something that you should use. And everyone on this call, the better you use these keywords, it'll help you get filtered by different applicant tracking systems. It'll putting these keywords on your resume, if you're in a certain practice area, is going to make you much more likely to get hired. So yeah, I love this article. I spent a lot of time preparing it. I hope you will look at it. Search I did is just resume keywords, bcgsearch.com. So if you can't remember that URL, do that. But yeah, everyone on this call should review this because it's an important article, I think, in terms of finding the right keywords. And again, I spent a lot of time on it just because I thought it was, because I think it's very important that you do that. And it's something I should have been promoting, but I didn't. Okay, let's see. Well, next question. Yeah, I formerly worked at a law firm before leaving to go in-house a year and a half ago. Ever since leaving, the firm has let me know that I'm always welcome back and has asked me to return due to some recent departures. I am interested in returning as the in-house life is not as interesting as I hoped. Now I have the lunch scheduled with three partners to discuss returning. What do you think the partners are likely to focus on during the interview? Great questions. Give me one second here. I'm going to pull up the BCG interview guide. Give me one second. Okay. Just give me 1 second here. Oh, and for everyone that's on the call, it's kind of cool. So a lot of people are always asking for interview advice and that sort of thing. And I will be in the next, what the heck is this? Give me 1 second. I'll make sure something wrong. No, can't show that. So give me 1 second. These are the questions that people are looking for. They're looking for, can you do the work? Do you have the skills? But the big one they're looking for is commitment. So if the law firm is interviewing you from an in-house position to come back to a law firm, what they're most concerned about is, are you going to stay in a law firm? And I think you're in a very good situation if the law firm said that you can come back there, because most people that leave law firms and go in-house, it becomes exceptionally difficult for them to get back to law firms because it just looks like they're not committed to that practice setting. So I would be focusing on the fact that this is what I really want. I made a mistake going in-house. The big thing about, and this is what I'll send off, by the way, and then there's articles and things. So if you click on it, there's articles about it. These, when you click on these, it takes you to articles. But that's the big thing with when you go in-house is people are worried that if they bring you back, that you won't commit, that you might not want the job. And so the employers are always going to be focusing on whether or not you seem like you're someone that really wants to work there if you come back. And so that's the commitment is the most important thing. So I would talk about commitment. The other thing, let me just put in one other thing. Why going in-house is bad. Let me say, and then so I'll just pull this up, this article right here. I'll put this article in the chat as well, or I'll put this on the site. But typically, why do you tell the law firm that you want to go back? So the reason you say you want to go back is you can say I made a mistake. And then the reason why you made a mistake would often be related to the fact that the work's not as sophisticated. I'm more of a generalist. I miss working for paying clients. I miss working with other attorneys. I want to practice law in the long term. I want to eventually get clients, develop my own business. I can't do that in-house. There's so many reasons to work in a law firm as opposed to in-house. When you're working in a law firm, you're a profit center, meaning you're making the firm money. When you're working in-house, you're often viewed more as a cost center. You're often attorneys that go in-house often become experts in giving other people work instead of doing work themselves. The work that they get is not as sophisticated. Their jobs are actually much more dangerous often because companies do mass layoffs. Companies go out of business. Companies bring in new GCs and want their own people in the legal department. They fire the existing people, their own CEOs. So all these different things are really important, but you want to focus on the fact that you want to work in a law firm and you want the sophisticated work and the ability to work on different clients. And the work is more sophisticated in a law firm. And you do have you can have a much more long-term career working in a law firm as opposed to in-house. It's a smarter way to go if you want to practice law in the long term. So that's what I would focus on. I made a mistake. I realized I want to be in a law firm. I want to work with paying clients. I want to get much better experience. And law firms are businesses that need to do good work to stay in business. And I think this is great. You were able to this doesn't happen a lot of times. So I think you should do everything you can to do well in the interview and just position yourself as someone that really wants to come back and that you're going to stay. That's their biggest worry too, is that you may come back and not be committed. Why did you leave in the first place? Or did you leave for less hours? Because if you work for less hours, then that makes it look like you're not going to want to work hard when you go back. So you need to think about that as well. Okay, so next question. What are the highest paying legal practice areas for law students to consider if they want long-term career opportunities? So that's another good question. What are the highest paying practice areas? And that gives you one second. Okay, so what I would recommend that you do is any time you have a question like this, and I'm not sitting here trying to brag but I am very interested in this particular kind of any topic that most people have. I'm very interested in. So if you were to do from anytime you have these type of questions, most questions that you have I hopefully have answered them at some point in my career. So you have highest paying practice areas. I just did that search. And then I have bcgsearch.com. And so there are articles that I've written about a lot of these topics. And so this is 2026. This talks about the compensation by practice area and which ones are the highest. And so you can review this article, cut and paste this and show you that this is just one article. I've got others, but this kind of shows you what the practice area tends to be by different types of practice areas that people do. So I'll put that in the chat. That's one article. And typically, the biggest thing to kind of remember about, oh, look at this one, attorney compensation by practice. That's the same one. Law firms, okay, 10 top 10 practice areas with the highest salaries. Okay, yeah, so here's another one, IP, corporate. So the big thing to remember about practice areas and which ones pay the most is one of the biggest rules to remember is the larger the business that's being represented, typically the more money people will make. Firms that represent the largest clients typically will pay the most. And then the other thing that's fun to think about. So I was talking to a doctor that was a surgeon, and he was complaining about certain medical schools are letting in people that shouldn't be there for whatever reason. They've been advanced, and he was saying that it's very dangerous. And so it's like this with the practice of law too. So if a doctor that's not highly qualified and doesn't have extremely good skills becomes a heart surgeon, that's really scary, right? So you don't want people that are operating on your heart where you could suddenly die that don't have high qualifications. And then so the specialties in the medical profession pay the most are things like heart surgeon, brain surgeon, things where if something bad happens, people die. And then the ones that don't pay the most would be things with low consequences. Sleep doctors, I'd say a psychiatrist, a radiologist. That radiologist kind of interprets a X-ray, but the doctor is the one that makes the ultimate call. So consequences. So what has the highest consequences? So typically it's the same way in the practice of law. If you're representing a giant company in a merger and you screw up, or a public offering you screw up, those are major consequences that could be hundreds of millions of dollars. Or if you lose a big case so everything's about consequences. So when you think about the practice area you want to be in, or the size firm you want to be in, the bigger the firm, the bigger the matters are working on, the bigger the consequences, the more it's going to pay. Because the people with the most money are going to choose the best people they possibly can. So the most important way to think about what you do is consequences and what has the most consequences. So that's the reason to try to advance in large firms, because you're working on matters that have the most consequences. And so just think about it that way. How does it work with law schools? So people that go to the best law schools presumably get the best grades or get the best jobs because the biggest companies and clients want to hire the best people they possibly can. So you get a heart surgeon. If you went to some medical school in the Dominican Republic and came out and then got a job, it'd be very difficult if you weren't extremely talented to become a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon. The markets essentially should be or determine the consequences of things you're willing to work on. Okay. Next question. If I manage to get a law firm interview, how do I emanate self-confidence during an interview when I have a multi-year employment gap on my resume? Otherwise, my law firm pitch is ready in the professional sense, but I'm lacking confidence because of the gap. It depends on why you're unemployed. But the big thing to remember is if you're an attorney, you pass the bar, you can always find someone to hire you. And I place attorneys all the time that have multi-year gaps on the resume. All right. Okay. So if you have a gap in your resume, just remember that whoever's interviewing you needs someone to do whatever the work that they have is. And so that multi-year gap should not give you a lack of self-confidence. It should, you can frame it in a way, how do you think about things? In cognitive psychology, I forget what it's called, but or cognitive behavioral therapy, you try to position things that you think are negative in a positive way. I took time off and that's made me more enthusiastic to come back. I really want to work. Mothers take years off all the time to have kids and raise children and go back. So anybody can successfully go back. It's just the type of firm you get into may have something to do with it. But if you feel like you were good at what you did before, or you learned something during your time off, then you should be able to have self-confidence. And all these questions about self-confidence, thinking about yourself a certain way, most of the stuff there are books on it. There's all sorts of ways to build up your self-confidence of yourself. I'm not too worried about you having self-confidence. People need to think and visualize and do what they can to get self-confidence. And that's something you can definitely do. Okay, next question. Let me see here. Okay. Okay, I'm interviewing with a boutique firm that hinted already that they want me to do client development work for them. I am not that type of person. I am transactional, but I really need a job and I'm planning to move on from this firm as soon as I can. Also because the remuneration they offered is minimal. I'm afraid to make clear at this point that I do not want to build a book of business, especially if they're offering nothing in exchange. Any helpful thoughts on the situation? So Bill Urquhart, so Quinn Emanuel, used to be called Quinn Emanuel, Urquhart, Oliver, and whatever, Hedges. But that firm, there was a funny thing, they gave a presentation on business development when I was there. And Bill Urquhart said that the guy that's got the biggest book of business in LA is also one of the biggest nerds in LA. You don't have to develop business, you often don't have to have the best personality. It helps, but if you feel like you can do very competent work for people, then that can be helpful. I don't think if what you're saying is that you feel like you're just going to get one job. So I don't know why you would, if you don't want to work in this place, you could definitely probably find other jobs by expanding your search geographically or by applying to more places. If that's not what you want, I don't think if you don't want to work somewhere, then I don't really think there's a point in doing that. If you go to a place with the objective of leaving, I don't think that's helpful either. I just would not recommend working there if you didn't want to. If you don't want to be an attorney that develops business, that's up to you. And certainly the majority of attorneys in the country don't have business or develop business, but you're going to remember that you'll have to be dependent on others for work for your career. So that means you could be in-house, you could go to firms where they can just give you work to do. And yeah, but if that's not the way, if you don't have the desire to develop business, then I don't know why you would set yourself up and go to some place where it sounds like you're going to, I don't think that is something to worry about. Okay, let's see this question. Reed, making a good impression on clients. What's the deal with hairstyles, particularly men with long hair? Was that a thing at this point or has it shifted any? Yeah, there are firms where you can have long hair and that's fine. But the majority of firms, if you have that, it's going to create problems because most clients expect people to look professional, but not all. So it also depends geographically where you are. You're going to get away with it much more in LA than you would in New York City. So I've had candidates. I had one candidate once who was the top of his class, a valedictorian, major law school, and he got into a New York office, Palo Alto office of a major New York law firm, and decided to grow his hair long. Then he needed to find a job, and no one would hire him because his hair was too long. That's in the Bay Area. You have to be careful about your appearance. And just remember that wherever you're working, you're a representative of the firm. You go out in the public. So you have to be careful and think about things that way. Okay, next question. I'm applying for first-year associate's positions as a 26 graduate. Given my inexperience, how should I frame, how can I best help the firm? What stands most to you as an associate when you interview, ask you questions first? So you asked what makes new associates succeed here? What have the best people done right away when they start here? Those are the questions you ask. You ask questions about what you can do for them, what would make you successful, what would make you want to be one of the best new hires you've ever had, and that sort of thing, because no one asks that. So putting yourself in a position where you ask them, what can I do for you? And not what can the employer do for you? Let's see. Okay. Next question. Okay, what would be your best advice for a lawyer trying to transition from domestic practice in a single jurisdiction, like domestic litigation with a bit of experience in cross-border matters, to international track? How would such candidates position their existing experience, and what skills or narrative tend to make this transition more credible or attractive? So if you're trying to do cross-border litigation to international arbitration or something along those lines, you need to basically, let me just see if I still have this open. You need to figure out how to make your resume look more focused on what you're trying to do. And so you have descriptions of things that are related to what would be international related law if you wanted to do that. Putting in, thinking about, this is from the Resume Keywords article, thinking about different things that would make it look like you may be involved in international trade and that sort of thing, international law. So you could do that. I'm sorry, I was blanking out here for a second. You don't need to be, you could be a commercial litigator and transition into that thing. But typically, the best way of doing it is just to, if you have experience, some cross-border experience, and I don't know if you're talking about litigation cross, you would basically try to lead with keywords and things at the beginning of your experience related to your international experience, and then de-emphasize your other experience. So the mistake that people make is they put in their existing resume and then they just look like a regular resume. So you beef up the beginning of your resume talking about the international matters you've worked on, and then if there's other things you've done in your job or in your previous jobs, you just de-emphasize them. You want, the whole goal of a resume is to give a sense, like, meaning people look at it and think, this smells like, this looks like this practice area, instead of multiple practice areas. So you want people to think this is the type of attorney it is. So you, for example, if you were on an international journal in law school, but then also on some journal related to civil rights or something, you only believe the journal related international journal. If you were doing different types of transactional work and litigation in your previous job, you might just talk about litigation. Everything, people need to look at your resume and say, this looks like an international attorney. The more you can make it look like that, the better. So you emphasize things related to that, and you de-emphasize, because people just want to say, this looks like this job. And so that's how people approach it that are the most successful. Okay. One second. Okay. Thank you for this webinar. I graduated and passed the bar. Thank you. In 2024, I'm currently working at a boutique firm handling commercial litigation. My long-term goal is to transition to big law, and I was hoping to get your perspective on time. You mentioned second to fifth year positions are easier in comparison with the more senior ones. Do you have a recommended timeline for preparing the move? Thanks for your insights. Yeah, so generally, you're going to be more marketable closer to your second year than your first year. So that's the best time to move. If you're there for 2 years, it looks like you're loyal and you're doing a good job and people are keeping you around. Sometimes even being there 3 years looks better. Being there 3 years shows that you are fitting in, you're getting work. And so that would be my recommendation after 2 years. And then if you have good qualifications or your law firm boutique is well regarded, big law firms love hiring people from smaller firms and good boutiques, because those people are likely to come in and be highly motivated and often work much harder than the people that are there, and they have something to prove because they didn't start out there. When other people at that same class level are leaving or maybe jaded and stuff, that's when I would recommend potentially looking. And then when you do your resume, I don't know what your practice, commercial litigation, then you want to focus on commercial litigation and talk about that. And if you were giving other practices like tort, I don't know, but make things focused on that. That'll help you. Okay, so this next question, and this is not going to be an answer. How can you sell yourself to firms or even the government if the only jobs you've been able to get teaching law in the past 7 years was a lecturer? Well, that's a good question. Um, so the practice setting that you choose for yourself is choosing a career path. If someone wants to teach law and they choose that as a career path, that's a different career path than it would be if you started off as a government attorney or you're working in a law firm. So how do you sell yourself to firms? So the good news is that you can apply to smaller firms, you can do all sorts of things, and people that went to the law school you taught at and potentially get jobs. The problem with academics in particular is it's often more theoretical than just direct, like the attorneys are trained to do, that they need to do for clients. So it's often less direct, and then it's often theoretical, and people will look at you as someone that chose to do something as opposed to something different. So it's always difficult to make that transition. But how would I sell myself? I would just say, I've done this. I want to go back to practicing law or start practicing law. And just as people get out of law school when they're 25, 26 often, and then your career can last 50 more years. So you just need to figure out how to get yourself into a law firm. Often it's trying to work for solo practitioners. Sometimes it's starting your own firm or working in smaller firms. Sometimes it's trying to get jobs in different government offices in different locations in the country. There's all sorts of things that you can do to get a job, and you will get a job. But just remember that you chose that practice setting for a reason, and you've been spending 7 years doing that for a reason instead of working in a law firm. So those are things that people are going to think about. And maybe why would you want to go to work in the government or law firm if you've been doing the same thing for 7 years? Because you probably wouldn't be doing it at 7 years if you didn't enjoy it. So that's kind of how I might think about it if I was you. How should I prepare for big law interviews? Questions about handling demanding partners, tight deadlines, and high pressure legal work. Okay, typically they're not going to ask you questions about how to handle demanding partners, tight deadlines, and high pressure legal work. What they're looking for is people that are gung ho and look like they really want to work hard and will be the sort of people that are going to do the best possible work they can. And that they'll like working with. So you won't get those sort of questions, but you need to look like you're very motivated when you go into interviews to do the best work possible. And so the more motivated you look and the more motivated you appear, the more likely they are to hire you. You need to look and act like someone that is going to eat, drink, and sleep whatever that law firm is going to throw at you, whatever those partners are going to throw. Because if you don't do it, they'll find someone else that will. And big firms are constantly circulating people out that don't work as hard as they can. It's just so you need to always be aware of if you're working for a major U.S. law firm. If you want to work in a major U.S. law firm, you need to look like someone who's going to make that a priority above everything. And people that advance in big law firms and become partners and so forth are able to make that law firm a priority above everything and their jobs. And often they get divorces and all sorts of things. But that's what most big law firms are looking for. Not all offices and not all partners, but a large number of them are. Okay. Sorry. So I'm just looking at the question. Okay, next question. I am getting interviews, but no offers, and sometimes I don't hear back from these jobs at all, even after some follow-ups. I wonder if I'm doing something wrong or any advice how to change my approach entirely. I leave the interviews feeling confident and expectant, and then it's total silence. This is really taking a hit on my confidence. Okay, so different things could be happening. Sometimes your practice area could be slowing and the law firm doesn't have any news for you, and because of that. Other times you're not getting interviews because, or you're not getting offers because they're better people that they're able to interview for the jobs that you're applying for. Sometimes and all the things I spoke about today in terms of enthusiasm and how you're approaching your interviews could be how hungry you look, how whether or not you're letting other people talk, how you're coming across, or how are all things that you can control. So I'd recommend when I'll send out an interview a guide that I give to BCG candidates. I'll also send out the PowerPoints from this. But typically, that would be meaning that you're probably not, there's probably things that you're doing wrong. A lot of them probably are things that I talked about today, and almost everything is fixable. The good news here is you're getting all these interviews, so you're obviously look good on paper. My thought is that you're probably doing some things that are wrong. People say things that are wrong. People give the wrong impression. So you should evaluate everything that you've done wrong. Now, I'll tell you what I did that worked for me. So when I was a young attorney, I lost the job with a judge I was working for, and I hadn't yet taken the bar exam, and I didn't have any jobs I could do, and I'd interviewed every interview I'd ever had. I'd been poorly at, except for I did get some jobs, and what I did is I wrote down what happened in every interview that I could remember, and I sat down and I just wrote in a journal for a long time everything that I did wrong, and then I started seeing what I could do differently and mistakes that I made. I was talking too much about myself. I wasn't acting enthusiastic about the job. I was acting inappropriately and trying to bond with people when I needed to be more professional at that point in the interview. It was not making eye contact. It was talking about things unrelated to my desire to do the work so all these different things I wrote down. So anybody that's not getting the interviews or getting offers, you should look at things and you should look at things in that way to help you. Question. Wait a second. Just reading a question here. Next question. I'm an EU regulatory compliance lawyer from Brussels who is admitted to the New York bar. I am entering the U.S. legal market now in Washington, D.C., where I'm located. And so far, I have one boutique law firm that talks with me. I'm past 3 interview rounds. I'm meeting with the fourth partner in 2 days. Their managing partner already told me that they will not be paying me any money. They know that I desperately need an entry point in the U.S. market. And not many law firms talk to me for 6-year career break. Do I have any negotiation position to try to make the law firm understand that I need money to make a living, or do I just work for them for free? I think that's actually illegal. At least it is in California and some states. I don't know about that. I do know that were it me, I would research all the different firms that need someone that do the kind of work that you do and apply to them, or try to find people in those firms that might need someone like you. Do you have negotiation position? I would think after they offer you something and you have a job, which I would wait for, then I would try to negotiate at that point. I wouldn't try to negotiate anything before you actually get an offer. So just concentrate first on getting an offer. And then after getting an offer, you can worry about these other things. It's not a good situation that you're in. I don't know how many years of experience you have. It's definitely not easy for foreign attorneys to get positions in the U.S. I would research. As soon as you can use ChatGPT to just ask what firms do EU regulatory compliance in Washington, D.C., and New York, and states you probably should be applying to a lot more places. But yeah, I don't think would I work for them for free if you have to get experience, but I don't think that's legal. And I don't know, and I'm sure that they would know that, but yeah. Okay, let me see here. Do you have to office in a minute? I'm just looking. This is a cool question. I'll answer this. How can law firms compensate attorneys in high demand practice areas without creating a resentment among existing lawyers? The best way to do that is with higher bonuses typically. So if people are in these high demand practice areas and working very hard, then it's with bonuses. Large law firms will pay people in all practice areas roughly the same. And they do that because they want to make sure that there's not that kind of resentment. So if your law firm's doing that you should probably be thinking about things that way. But to give you a very simple answer to that question, it's often with bonuses and also with often starting bonuses if you're recruiting people that way. And that's something that lawyers will do. When I first started practicing law, there was patent prosecution was in great demand. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was in like 1999 or 2000. I had this one law firm offer a second year, third year patent associate, but they gave them a salary that was like $50,000 more than their associates were making, a $50,000 starting bonus, all the sorts of things. But typically in this situation, if you're a middle market firm, for example, and your practice area is in very high demand, you would want to bonus people if you don't want to keep the base compensation at the same level. Okay, what practice areas? So this is a question just about what practice areas you should consider if you want to have more opportunity. Let me just give you 1 second. If you want to have more opportunities, typically the practice areas that are most in demand are always going to be litigation related. So that would give you more opportunities. Anything you do that's litigation related, whether it's personal injury litigation, regular litigation, family law, insurance defense, most attorney jobs are in litigation. Fewer of them are in corporate, and fewer of them are in IP and things like that. But having training in different practice areas that a lot of people aren't doing, where there's fewer corporate attorneys in litigation, gives you an edge in marketability to some extent. And then also your ability to your more define your practice area. For example, if you're in employee benefits, the more marketable you are, but the fewer jobs there are often. But to have access to the most jobs, you're typically looking anything to do with litigation. Okay, what is the best way to position for a lawyer coming from a salary role in a local law firm, third world market, Ukraine in my case, we're pursuing mid-level or senior associate opportunities in BigLaw? How would it be best to address the apparent mismatch from, I can't answer that question because I don't have enough experience with that. But what I would say, if you're coming to Ukraine, you're trying to get a position in BigLaw in the US, I'm assuming, then you would try to find firms that had a lot of work that they were doing in Ukraine, which is absolutely possible. So you identify firms that are representing companies in Ukraine or US businesses doing business in Ukraine and seeing if you could do something with that. Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here. I think this was a helpful webinar, very helpful for interviewing. And like I said, I'll be sending around the transcript, the PowerPoint after this, and that'll be going out hopefully on the next day or so. And thanks again for being here. And I will try to do a resume workshop in the next week or two, hopefully. But thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.